My name is Zbigniew Wojcik, but everybody knows me as Bish. I was formerly, my last occupation was chair of EMAC, which is the Eastern European Migrants Advice Committee. Previously, I'd been the Racial Equality Officer for Employment at the Derby Racial Equality Council, and I did a number of other things as well in my part-time and voluntary basis, one being the chair of the Law Centre in Derby, also chair of anti-apartheid, also chair of a number of other organisations. So did a general mass of all sorts of different things.
And what made you want to go into the REC?
Well, it's a long story. I was involved in a lot of political campaigning, particularly since I was in my formative years, probably around about 1920, when I became very politically active. I had worked in Derby in the railway industry. At the end of the miners' strike, I lost my job, couldn't work in Derby because of my political activities. And I went to work in Brixton in London. I worked there for 2.5 years. And when I came back to Derby, I got involved in a massive campaign of a deportation, a young Asian woman facing deportation called Farida Bibi. It was a national campaign. We eventually won it and proved conclusively that this Asian girl was the daughter of an Asian man from the Muslim community, and it was the first time DNA had ever been used to prove conclusively the paternity and maternity of this young woman. And it was the first time in the world it had ever been used in this way. And I got a lot of kudos from that. And people said to me, why don't you get involved in doing work in the community? And that led to me applying for the position at the Racial Equality Council, doing employment, complainant aid, housing, all sorts of things like that. And at the end of it, I was also asked to lead on setting up a law centre in Derby, which was my formative work, and which I did for over 8-9 years. And then eventually Derby had a law centre open, and I was the chair of that law centre. And without me, there would not have been a law centre. And we specialised in things like immigration, housing, and issues of that nature. But I've always been a campaigner ever since I was 19, 20. So I was always been involved in a variety of things. And after I left the REC in 2007, I set my own company up to deal with things like immigration, migration, and other issues like that.
During your time working at the REC, what motivated you to carry on working there?
It was a challenge, everyday challenge of dealing with people's problems, difficulties. Been involved in one of the first major cases, which was known as the Burton and Roar case, where a young 2 black women were faced racial abuse and discrimination by Bernard Manning, the comedian, at the Pennine Hotel, and campaigns like that, which were, of interest. Not only of interest, I felt very passionately about working in that and helping people get their rights, facing up against discrimination in all sorts of forms. Going to tribunal, representing people. I didn't just put it down in a book, you know what I mean? I actually did it. I actually went and represented people. And for 15 years, I had a massive track record. I've been able to win cases at tribunal, go on campaign, launch the Let's Kick Racism Out of Football with Derby County here in the city. Did all sorts of different things, all sorts of things. So every day was different. Every day was different in that sense, because somebody would walk in and want to, I've got a problem, can you help me? And that's sort of that, my answer was, well, if I can't help you, I'll find a way to help you. And that was, that was always my maxim. to be able to use.
Yeah. And did you say the REC is not up and running anymore?
It's not, to my knowledge, it's not functioning like it did when I was there. You know, I was there from 1989 to 2007. I left because of a lot of reasons, and I don't want to go into them. But the reasons the REC should have been foremost in Derby was it was an organisation of the community, representing the community, and we wanted to broaden its remit to take in other issues in relation to all forms of discrimination and equality issues. And I believe the organisation has singularly failed to do that. And I think that's one of the big problems.
Where are you from? Just stand over here.
Well, my name is Polish, as you probably grasped. My father was a refugee who came to this country in 1947 after the Second World War. My mother was from South Wales, from Cardiff. It's a bit of a mixture. But I was born and bred in Derbyshire, would you believe? In fact, I was born in Matlock in Wirksworth. I have connections, as I say, with Poland and also with Wales as well. But I always classify myself as someone who's Derbyshire born and Derbyshire bred.
How do you feel about what you did in the industry?
How do I feel? Well, that's a difficult question. I always feel that for a long period of time, I always felt that I succeeded in what I wanted to do, and really did do the things that I think was so necessary. Particularly when you're working with people, the satisfaction is about working with people and satisfaction. And in 2003, they gave me the MBE, which I won for and actually went to the palace and got my medal from the Prince Charles the same day as Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones got knighted. So it was a satisfaction, really, in that sense. And for a long time, I derived a lot of satisfaction from the work I did. And I don't regret anything that I ever did. That's the thing about it. I worked with good people, and I worked with people who could, in that sense, take things forward.
Okay, what is the REC?
What it was, the Racial Equality Council, and its remit was to represent the whole of the what we call the minority communities within Derbyshire. We had a Derbyshire remit, not just a Derby remit. Although we weren't funded by the county, my post was a unique post, that it was one of the last posts to be funded by both the county and the city. And my role at the end of the day gave me that unique insight to be able to go across the county, to be able to deal with cases from people from all over the county. So I could go to Matlock or to Chesterfield or to Derby. The biggest level of community coming was from Derby. And of course, with the increase in facilities like the establishment of the law centre, it meant that work could be spread out even in a wider way. I feel it's a great pity that the Racial Equality Council doesn't exist in the way it should. But politics played a big part to that. And I think that's a tragedy, because the ultimate losers are the very people who use that services. So in that sense, that's really where I would come from. However, my individual beliefs are wider than even the ideas of the focus of what we would call the Racial Equality Council. It would be wide to say that I take an international perspective of equality issues right across the board, and it's always been that way with me. And I think until recently, when really I've slowed down a lot, the reason that's always been my driving factor, and it's always been in the interest of people And it starts with people and never with anything else.
You mentioned you've worked with numerous different people.
Yeah.
If there was a quality that you could take away from people and replace it with something else, what would those two exchanges be?
That's very difficult to say, actually. For me, a quality to me is to treat people as exactly as you expect to be treated yourself. So therefore, if we talk about equality, equality means to put a hand across to somebody, shake that hand, and though there is difference and understanding, you might be dealing with women, you might be dealing with people from Africa, or you might be dealing with people from all different walks of life. The real issue at the end of the day is treating, for me, is the concept of treating those people equally and trying to treat them on an equal basis. And that doesn't mean that you don't see the diversity of an individual. I do. You know, you meet someone like, for example, Mandela. Mandela's philosophy was always about that. You know what I mean? In that sense, not about, how to put it, not about saying we can all sit in a room, we'll all drink, we'll all agree with everything. No, that's not the issue. We've got to thrash out the differences, make those differences become paramount, and then learn to work with each other. And I think that's an ultimate failing that's been happening for such a long time. And that's the division that we see all over the world. You know, maybe in the Ukraine, we're in Syria, maybe in Palestine, and in Israel, Golan, wherever you come to, you know, that real fight for recognising that there is a spirit, I would put it in a spiritual way, and I don't mean it in a religious way, I mean a spiritual way, of coming together and saying that there is a better world. And that better world includes all of us, not just one group of people. So in that sense, that's always been my philosophy.
Was there a particular situation or a thing that made you want to actually represent the REC and be part of the REC? Was there an actual an experience that made you think?
My experience are wider than what the Racial Equality Council. The Racial Equality Council movement is a good movement, but when you stand somewhere like Auschwitz and you walk around that's when you see the real issue. That's what inequality can do, and I fight that every day. The opposite of that. In that sense, to understand, we shouldn't be letting those things ever take place. Srebrenica, going into Rwanda, going to places like that. Why is it that inhumanity takes place? We're talking about human beings here, learning to live with each other and understand each other. And that's a difficulty, I think, in some ways, that we fail to grasp. And when you see something like Auschwitz, then, to me, I think every young person should formally go there and read about what inequality can lead to and what it leads to in such a way as the massacre and the massacre of millions.
I will say this, I mean, the RAC is no longer.
I know.
So is there an alternative, or what would you like to see in its place? And if you could be part of that, what would you like to change?
Well, the thing is about it, and my argument is this, the destruction of the REC was done on political grounds. And to me, that is disgraceful, because it takes out the equation of people and what people needs. It's like cutting into the welfare section. You know what I mean? Taking away welfare rights, taking away issues in relations to people with disabilities, to people who are elderly and infirm. You know what I mean? Taking away those rights, to me, I just can't understand it. I just don't know where people are coming from. And I cannot understand a councillor saying this is what we're going to do. So I would always oppose that, and I always will stand up for it. I've done it as a councillor, trying to be a councillor. I've done it with issues in relation, for example, in Symphony with the incinerator and other issues like that. That, to me, is what real campaigning is about. But to be quite honest about it, the function of getting rid of the Racial Equality Council was done on the behest of political organisation in the city who felt they weren't needed. I think that it needed addressing. I think there needed to be a change of direction. I think there was a need for getting other disabilities and discrimination and issues in relations to equality on board. But as an organisation, I find that as an individual, and I would hope that as an organisation that they would learn to fight that again. I set up the Law Centre because there was a lack in Derby of legal advice, legal representation. It wasn't just advice. Plenty of people can give advice. It's representing people, giving people their rights. A legal rights team, whatever it does, is needed. Problem is, it's a generation that's come and gone, and that's looked round and saying, well, there's no object. My objective was always to engage, particularly with young people. Younger people, the better, because their minds were not trammelled by the political nuances of different political parties or the objection of maybe the city council or the county council. My argument is free thinking, to be able to think in a different way and be critical of what people give you and try and give you. Because they're always going to try and give you as little they possibly can, not what is really needed. And we live in a society that is guided like that. I'm a socialist. I've been a socialist all my life, and I don't care what people think. That's what I believe. The real issue is we struggle to see it, and we've seen destruction of any when you become like me, and somebody who objects to the way that society is set out and says, I don't want to believe that, then it becomes very, very difficult because you're seen solely as being opposite. My argument is not. I'm radical, I'm revolutionary in the way I think. My way of thinking is engagement. First thing is to engage from the bottom, not from the top. I think that's what's needed, and it's missing, and politically it's missing, and we can see what's happening all over the world, even within this country, and the horrors that it can unleash by people treating people in a different way. And the voice is not coming out to really, in that sense, to be able to say, this is what we really need to do. And we're governed by a very, very powerful media. That media is the strongest thing because it trammels the lines in that sense. We've got the opportunity, but the problem is we can't seem to release the energies of young people to be able to change the world.
Speaking of young people, no disrespect, but you are from a different society and different time, and we're talking
Go on.
so music-wise, and in fact socially, anything pretty much goes. What are your views on that? Do you think people just allow things to happen, say certain things, and they think it's okay? And you've been fighting for the opposite.
Well, let's put it this way. I came from the 60s generation. No one was more radical than what music in the 60s was, the radical music of the time, against war and against everything. That's what I cut my spurs within that sort of movement. Marching in against Vietnam in 1968 in London, being actually in the heart of that sort of thing. And I was there, so I know what I'm talking about. I stood at the picket lines during the miners' strike. I've fought the police. Young people have never experienced that. That's the experience I had, and in that sense, and again, trying to, how to put that together, it's actually giving that across. But I also know that in the spirit of young people, there is enormous potential. There is an absolutely huge potential. We blame young people from the problems of society. We shouldn't be doing that. What we should be giving them the ability, the knowledge, the education, at the end of the day, to challenge the precepts that are given every day of their life. And that's often the difficulties. Very, very much is it the difficulties that you you can envisage, you can actually see. And I feel sorry for a lot of young people, because a lot of things are put on young people. I know, and I don't think in another generation. I love music, of all music, and I like the music of today as much as I like the music of the 60s. I think it's radical. I think there's lots and lots of good things that come through. People said, oh, they do this, it's disgusting. I know things that was equally as disgusting, or seemed disgusting in the 60s, as what they are today. And but the question was to challenge. And the question is that sort of thing, is to use the mediums like music, like art, like the expression in that sense of how we can change the world in a different way and think in a different way. You know what I mean? The concerts of, apartheid, for example, the concerts of that's the concept that can come through. It is difficult at the end of the day to envisage it, because older people are not seeing. You think, well, I've got the fire's gone out. No, the fire's not gone out. The question is, I just think a little bit more. I don't jump into everything as quickly as I did when I was, say, 20. But the point is, it's still there. The fire still burns. And the difficulty is that a lot of younger people will say, well, you haven't experienced what it's like. I know what it's like to be in poverty. I know what it's like to be, sitting in a bed sit with nothing and no money. You know what I mean? I've had the days on the dole. I've had the good days as well. So, I know what, life is about in that sense.
Based on what you know about community and your perspective on community, could you just say to me what community was in your day and what community is now for you, how you see it?
I think the tragedy is the community's been smashed up. And I think that's the biggest problem we've got. The communities in the 60s and the 70s, my example of that was to use, say, the miners' strike. You go to communities out of Derby, places like Shirebrook, places like Pinkston, places like that. I go there today. I go to Sports Direct, which is a huge company, produces all its There's 850 Polish workers working there, right? They're on minimum wage. They're being absolutely treated with contempt. But you have a community there which looks like it's come out of the Victorian age. You know what I mean? In that sense, it's like a throwback of things that's taking place. But that harmony, which was there, of people being together, is not there. I think that's the divisiveness that has taken place. I think you can see that in the situation in Derby, for example. You go to parts of Derby that 20 years ago you would have considered no-go areas. I don't believe in this concept. I never believed there isn't a place you can go into. I was brought up in Normanton. I've lived in Normanton most of my life. It's only the last 3 or 4 years that I haven't lived there. And as far as I felt there was a great spirit. The biggest problem we've got today, it's been divided into different groups. And the problem is the danger of those groups start to fight each other. And when they do that, that's when the real problem starts to emerge. And people, of course, the danger is new communities coming in, suddenly being exploited by other things that are taking place. And the problem is, it's recognising that and breaking down the barriers and saying, look, what's creating all this? Poverty, deprivation, people not earning enough money, children not being educated. We've got a huge lack of facilities going in. And while the old maxim that we used to use a long time ago with the rich getting richer, I think it pertains more today than it's ever done. The poor are getting poorer. And then we'll see that in certain areas. And I'm not saying that we can't pull ourselves together as communities. But the thing that could have done it, and that was the Racial Equality Council, is not there. There is not that community spirit. The problem is local authorities, like the City Council, for example, come along with organisations will set up this organisation to support the communities. The problem is the organisations have been imposed from the top, not brought up from beneath. They're picking the leaders. And who has right to pick the leaders? The leaders come from the community itself. The community automatically produces its leaders. And this, to me, is the key issue. When you've got the authorities saying, we can say this person will make a good leader, will support this person, without recognising that people come out of that, come out of different struggles. And what it is not reflective and not being reflected into younger people. And so what you're getting is, you're getting people who are stooges, basically, at the end of the day, being picked because they fit the pattern that the city council or the county council throw on you. And to me, that is the wrong way. That's the wrong way of dealing. My politics came out of the very issue of challenging what the status quo was and not accepting the status quo. They didn't like that. I had police who hated me. I know if I was to go into the records today that they would have a file on me which was 6 inches deep. It didn't worry me because I knew that's how I was. But the point is, I didn't break the law. I challenged with every way, shape or form the existing status quo and used every method that I could possibly do to be able to break that down. Hopefully newer, younger people coming in will learn that. And you only learn it one way. You only learn it when you start to struggle to be able to finance something, to be able to do something. That you learn who your friends are and who are the people who can back you and support you. Community is people.